YouTube, welcome back to my channel. My name is McPato and this is McPato PC. This is a part 2 video, part 2 of 3, focusing on the Morpheus 2, specifically installed on a Vega 64 reference card. Part 1 was the unboxing, which you can find up in the corner here. Part 2 is the installation of the Morpheus 2 onto the Vega 64. And part 3 will be the results comparing the Morpheus 2 to my previous stock cooler. Alright, now you will notice that I've already gone ahead and removed the stock cooler from the Vega 64, and I did that to save time. I'm trying to keep my videos under 10 minutes so that you guys can stay engaged. It's not long, it's not boring, etc. If you are, however, wondering how to go about taking apart or dismantling your Vega 64, I'll put a link up in the corner here as well, which shows you how I do it the quick and easy way. One caution there, you might want to use something other than pliers to remove the two little connectors. One for the lighting on the top, the Radeon light, and one for the PWM, mini PWM fan control. Pliers, if you slip, you'll pop the wires, cut them right off, and damage your plug, which happened to me in a previous video. So that's something I would recommend you look into. Probably a little tool like a very, very fine file or a very fine screwdriver, something like that, maybe even a plastic wedge of some sort, and just kind of pry up the two sides one at a time, wiggling. It's in there pretty good and it's pretty hard to get out without causing damage. So that's something to be careful of. In my video I do use pliers and it did end up breaking my PWM wires. I sheared two of them off by accident when they slipped. So that's my tip for that. Moving along, we're going to get into the installation. I'm going to change the camera angle. And do keep in mind that I'm learning as I go as well. So there might be a couple of mistakes along the way, but that's fine. That's part of learning. So let's get into it. Let's start installing the heat sinks onto the VRM and the chokes. And then from there, we'll install the bracket for the GPU itself. We'll install the heatsink, and then we'll move on to the fan installation. One more thing to note, I will be using the reference bracket that goes on the back that holds the heatsink to the GPU. The reason is that I want to reuse my backplate. And if you use the retention bracket that comes with the kit, it's too large. The corners here, I guess, prevent you from reusing your factory backplate. So if that's something you're interested in, keep your retention bracket from your reference cooler handy. All right, let's change the camera and get into the install. All right, so what I'm doing now is I'm installing the heat sinks on the chokes. I made a mistake on this first one. In the end, it probably won't matter as much because the fans are on the heatsink blowing this way. But I also have fans in my case that are going to be blowing air from this way. So I realized it's probably best for me to put the heat sinks in this way as opposed to this way. So, and I've tried to remove this one and it's on there real well. So just a heads up that these do stick very well. I'm actually pretty impressed with the result. And how you apply these is that you peel one side off, you stick it on, apply some light pressure, peel a corner, and then it leaves the rest of the pad there. You then take your heatsink and affix it onto the component. Press lightly. I'm going to hold it for 5 to 10 seconds. And I'll move on to the next one. Now, they're not on there perfectly. These are larger than the chokes, so there's some overlap. But in the end, I think it'll be just fine. Everyone says you don't really need the heat sinks on the chokes at all. So this is sort of just one extra step that I'm doing. These are probably more meant for memory, like GDDR5, GDDR6, that kind of thing, which can obviously get quite warm, and the temperature can obviously have an impact on your performance. These are rated for quite a bit of heat, so it's not as critical. And again, if you're wondering how well they stick, they're on there real well. Like, I tried wiggling one off and it wouldn't budge. So my concerns with the adhesive are pretty much gone. I'm going to continue the rest of these, and then we'll move on to the VRMs next. All right, I've put on one of the VRM heat sinks. It works pretty much the same. It doesn't seem to stick quite as well to the VRM as it did to the chokes. And one more thing worth noting, still on there pretty firm though. This little thing on the bottom, little chip right there, that is some kind of a controller. And from what I've read, it can get pretty warm on the Vega cards. So you do get these little heat sinks. And I'm going to try to put one of those on there after I'm done with the VRM. Just to demonstrate for you guys the process here. Again, you just peel the blue back, comes off the strip. Then you find the spot you want to stick it on to the VRM. Apply it to the VRM. Then I'm taking just a small tool and pressing lightly onto the VRM. Yeah, see, it's not sticking as well. Maybe I need to clean these a little better than what I thought I had done, because they don't seem to be sticking. We'll see how this goes. If it doesn't stick, I might need to clean these again. So again, applying light pressure with this plastic tool, peel it back. Yeah, it's not sticking at all. So that's going to be a problem. Again, they look real clean. I don't know, maybe if I try up here, get a different effect. Let's just take the heatsink and try sticking it on. So it does seem to have stuck to that one. Alright, so I'm done with the heatsink placement. This is what it ended up looking like. I ran out of those narrow ones, these little guys here. But luckily there was enough for me to use individuals on these two, as well as the controller down here. Now these two here are not particularly well adhered to, and there's this one leftover VRM here. I'm hoping that the cross flow of air this way, as well as blowing down this way, will help dissipate enough heat from that VRM, as well as whole areas being cooled with the heat sinks. So hopefully there's not a lot of residual heat that's staying in that VRM there. I'll see if I can come up with a solution in the meantime, but it would have been nice to have had a VRM heatsink there as well. So now we're going to move on to the GPU heatsink application. The first thing I'm going to do is clean the surface of this heatsink. I understand it's brand new, however, there could be oil or leftover residual particles. So I'm just going to make sure it's clean using isopropyl alcohol, 99%. You can use less than that if you have 90, that's fine. 92, 93, 94, whatever you have. Over 90 should do the job. Obviously the higher better. It evaporates quicker, I think. Alright. Okay, so with our surface clean, we're going to now move on to the installation of these brackets. Alright, so for the brackets, for the GPU retention system, just make sure your arrows are both pointing the same way towards the front I/O of your graphics card. Otherwise, you're going to get an issue where the bracket here is going to push up against your heat pipe. Could cause you some problem, well, will cause you some problems. So just follow the instructions. They do indicate the arrows need to go to the front of the card. And if you do that, there's no issue at all. Next up, we're going to install these hexagonal screws onto the card. And because we're using an AMD Vega, we're going to use these little, probably can't see them, but little plastic washer. They're called mylar spacers. So we're going to use those. And with Vega, you use the farthest possible hole. That'll give you a spacing of 64 by 64 by 64 by 64, which is the correct spacing for Vega. Alright, so we've installed the brackets, and like I told you there, just make sure the arrows are pointing in the same direction towards the front I/O area of your video card. And that should be fine. Then we've installed the hexagonal screws with the mylar washers, which is those plastic little washers there. And that's as per the instructions, that's what you would do with a Hawaii GPU for AMD. And this is the closest thing, and it uses the same 64 by 64 thread distance, or screw distance, I guess, which is the absolute furthest you can go with this kit. So it works out well for everyone. We're going to move on. But before we do, I lied to you guys. I said I was going to use the stock backplate, the stock bracket, so that I could still use the stock backplate. That's what I thought it was. I've since realized that's not the case. If you look at this bracket, and I don't think I actually put on the backplate because the cooling shroud that goes on the card is gone, and there's nowhere to screw the backplate into. But anyway, look at this bracket. There's a hole in the middle here. And if you look at the one that comes in your kit, it's solid, okay? Why is that important? If you look at the back of the Vega, whoops, pardon me there, that would cover right here, right? Right now heat can escape. If you have a fan, it'll blow the heat off. If you use that solid one, you're kind of locking in the heat, and it, according to what I've read on forums, that would lock in heat and make your temperatures obviously go up higher on your GPU, your HBM, and your hotspot. So in an attempt to keep temperatures as cool as possible, I'm going to use this bracket with the hole in the middle, and that should allow some heat to dissipate. All right, it's time to apply or mount the heatsink to our Vega card, or in this case, the Vega to the heatsink. You see a little bit of thermal paste there. I just tried it to make sure the holes lined up, and they did, so that was no problem. So our next step is to line up the holes and set it down. For this step, we're going to use the screws with the springs. And our retention bracket. We're going to do this in a crisscross pattern, as is usually recommended. Tightening a little bit and moving on to another screw. Now you do want to make sure you tighten these all the way. If you don't, you're going to see your temperatures are probably really high, and that's because your base plate's not making good contact with the actual GPU core. Those little plastic washers we put in there, the Mylar spacers, their job is to ensure that the screws tighten fully but not too far. So they should prevent any potential damage from occurring. Now with that, we have completed the application of the heatsink to the video card itself. The next step is to obviously apply or install the fans, and we will do that next. Alright, so next up we're going to install the fans. Again, I'm using Corsair ML120s. These are really nice fans. There was a good sale recently on Newegg, so I picked a couple up. Again, I have bought, and these are PWM, so you can control them with software as far as the speed of the fan itself. And you can actually connect it to the 4-pin PWM connector on the motherboard, except that it is a mini or a VGA PWM connector. So I had to order a cable for that. It's a mini or VGA PWM to a splitter for regular PWM. So it's 2-to-1, mini one. I haven't received that yet, but I can still connect these to the motherboard and I'll be able to control them through software that way until I get my connector. So as I told you guys in the unboxing video, there's a total of 8 little brackets. 2 of them, or 4 of them rather, are for your low profile fans. And 4 of them, I don't know if you guys can see the difference, but they're quite a bit different. And 4 of them are for regular fans. So we're going to use the regular fan connector right here. And all these do is you hook them into the holes. And then, allegedly, you then pull it down behind the heatsink, and that locks it into place. Alright, I figured it out. It's a little embarrassing, but hey. So if you look at the end here, it's cut out specifically for the fan retention bracket. So I'll show you guys from the top view. Take your bracket, you hook it in, and then hook it into the appropriate spot on the fan. Then the other one, I find the inside ones a little tricky to get as opposed to the outside. I'll just turn this around. So I use something like this plastic tool here to help guide it into its notch. Once it's in place, it looks something like this. So that is quite a large cooler once it's all assembled. My belief that it wasn't as big as it looked on YouTube was mistaken. It's quite large, and if I measure it just for anyone curious, it's a good 3 inches, actually pretty close to exactly 3 inches wide. But yeah, that is what it looks like. Again, I'm going to tidy up those cables, just waiting for the little converter here for the mini PWM to regular. And it's also a splitter, so I can connect both fans to it. Then I'll be able to use my Radeon software to control the fans. Now, as far as the back plate, it still fits. It would not have fit with the other retention bracket here. And as you can see, it does leave this hole for dissipation of heat. Now, if you're not using the back plate, you have some exposed on the outside, probably get a little bit of airflow underneath as well. But my goal will be to use the back plate. And as I said earlier, and I've had to record this so many times, I don't know what will be in the final version, but these screws still obviously fit. There's just nowhere for them to screw into. So I'm going to go to the local hardware store and buy some small washers that work with these. Not washers, small nuts, and I'll be able to secure the back plate to the card using those nuts, and then I'll at least have the aesthetic of the back plate. I know they sold video cards like this forever, but I've got a back plate, why not use it? So that's going to complete the installation video. I apologize, it wasn't quite how I hoped. My dogs were quite active today, and I've had to record it over and over and over. So hopefully you found the steps that I did show helpful, and hopefully performance will be worth the time. And honestly, it wasn't very difficult to do. It's just, I guess, precision work, if you will. And obviously, I should have tested the heat sinks first. I had to remove a couple that I'd put on, but otherwise, pretty problem-free installation process. Now I'm going to go put it in my computer and start some testing, and I'll bring you guys part 3 very shortly with some results as far as the performance. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm McPato, and this was McPato PC. Bye-bye.